My name is Ben and I live in Australia. In the southeast of Australia lies the state of Victoria, and in that state lies the high country, an extremely vast and remote expanse of alpine mountains and valleys that's largely only accessible by four-wheel drive and can take days to get in and out of it. The place is popular with four-wheel drivers, deer hunters, and hikers. We four-wheel drive, and this was the destination chosen to go camping for a few days with my partner, Jess, and I. We could get some time away from the world beyond the reaches of mobile phones. The four-wheel drive was loaded up, lists were double-checked, vehicle maintenance was done, fuel was loaded up onto the roof racks, and the closest police station was notified of our destination and our trip. So off we went. We were headed to a place called the Wanangata Valley, a remote valley deep in the high country, a huge amphitheater type of valley with alpine mountains rising in every direction and a river running along the valley floor. Towards the end of the first full day of driving, we finally made our way down to the last track for the day, skirting the ridge and arriving at the valley floor as the sun dipped below the mountains. We found a nice secluded spot to pitch our tent for the night, nestled in amongst the eucalyptus trees, right by the riverbank. It was midweek and off-season, so we were really the only ones in the valley that we knew of. After setting up our camp and having a meal by the fire, the sun went down and we snuggled together in our sleeping bags. And in short order, we just decided to hit the hay. At some point in the night, I woke up to a loud noise. I wasn't sure what I heard, but from inside our tent, I just continued to listen. Nothing. Alright, I must be going mad. No sooner had I thought that, I heard another noise. It sounded like something falling off our camp table and hitting the ground. I chalked it up to possums or wombats. It's pretty common in the area and nothing to worry about. I should have packed up better after dinner, I thought, and quickly went back to sleep. Sunrise came and we slowly woke up, and I needed to pee. I opened up the tent and jumped out, looking around. I don't know what, but something just came over me, a chill. It wasn't the way we left it. Instead of seeing two chairs together by the fire where we were sitting last night, one of them was by the table, and on the table was a loaf of bread that I swear I packed away the night before. I walked over to the table to inspect it. A half-eaten piece of bread was just sitting there, with a very obvious chomp mark taken right out of it. I flung the tent open and asked, "Were you up before me? Did you have some bread?" "No," was the answer I got. Jess got up and together we went through all of our stuff. Nothing really seemed to be missing. As we went to check the four-wheel drive, I noticed some footprints. There were a bunch of them around the front of the car where the hood was. Most of the camp was covered in grass. This was one of the only few spots where there was just dirt. Had somebody tried to open it? They were very distinct footprints, not mine or my partner's. Perhaps they'd just already been there. These camping spots are used intermittently, and obviously we weren't looking at the ground when we arrived the night before, especially with the sun setting. I don't think either of us wanted to actually admit that we were both thinking the same thing. Somebody had been creeping around our campsite in the night, very far from civilization. We discussed if it was a possum, and maybe that could have been the one that made the bite marks. Argued about if one of us had left the bread out, and eventually discussed moving on, camping somewhere else. After much deliberation, we just decided to stay. I had the rifle and the four-wheel drive, which I guess gave me an overinflated sense of safety, which in hindsight was a very poor choice. As the day rolled on, the sun shining and with nothing eventful happening, I decided to walk across the valley floor, about 800 meters to an old ruin of an isolated homestead, built by the settlers who ran cattle in the valley some 100 years ago. It's steeped in mystery. There's an old unsolved multiple murder from 1917 that always captivates people. I read the plaque and took some photos for myself, then started wandering back to camp. As I neared the halfway mark back to camp, I noticed Jess walking across the field toward me. Must have gotten bored, I thought. As she approached, it was clear that she was in a panic. Immediately, she started to tell me how she went down to the riverbank to wash the pots and pans. She looked up and saw somebody on the other side of the river, watching her from deep in the bush. I had no reason whatsoever not to believe her. I asked what he looked like and got told, an old man, 70s or thereabouts, scraggly looking, in old tattered clothes. Apparently, the second she looked up, he turned and walked away, disappeared into the impenetrable bush. I couldn't comprehend it. How was anybody out here without a four-wheel drive or a dirt bike? How would anybody get to that side of the bank without first crossing over from our side? There's days worth of damn near impossible to walk through bush on the other side just to get to where my partner had seen him. We decided to jump in the four-wheel and drive along the length of the valley, checking the dozen or so riverside camping spots as we went. I wanted to spot a camp, have my partner ID the guy, and make sure he wasn't creeping, with our theory being he might have just been a hunter off in the bush after a deer. Pretty normal. After making our way up and down the valley and not seeing anything or anyone, we drove back to camp at a loss to explain anything that had just taken place. As the sun started to set, with my partner and I kind of shaken, I grabbed the rifle and set it next to us as we cooked dinner and just chatted, having a few drinks to settle our nerves. Had we just been spooked? Was it just there's a lot of mystery surrounding this valley and that homestead murder? We continued to talk for a bit and settled into a good foot warming in front of the fire. At some point, Jess needed to go use the toilet, so I was asked to come with her to the spot behind a tree where we placed the portable toilet, I'd say about 50 meters from camp. Considering everything that had gone on, it was a no-brainer. Jess did her business, and then we turned around and came around the side of the tree. And that's when we saw him, standing at our camp. I'd say a meter from the rifle that I had sitting against the table. It was a man. Old, check. Scraggly looking, check. Tattered old clothes, check. Jess squeezed my arm so hard I thought it was going to come off. Everything about her body language screamed that this is the same guy. As we got closer, I could make out more odd things about him. He had a deer antler in his hand that looked like he'd been whittling away at, and what looked like antler pieces carved to plug large holes in his ears, like stretchers made out of bone. The same goes for the bone-looking buttons on his ratty old coat. He wore old leather shoes that looked homemade. "G'day, mate," he said. "Fuck me, mate. You gave us a fucking heart attack," I said, officially shitting bricks. "Where you come from, mate? Everything all right?" Just over yonder. You lot aren't hunting around here, are you?" he said, looking directly at my rifle. "Yeah, we might. Yeah, why?" "There's no hunting around here. Not enough deer as is." "Well, we really hadn't decided on it yet. Probably packing up anyway," I said, as I edged my way towards my rifle. "Should probably put this away anyway. Didn't mean to spook you, mate," I said, looking for an excuse to get that rifle into my hands. "Yeah, it's all good. Guns don't spook me," he said. I picked up the rifle by the barrel and just held it like a walking stick in an attempt to be non-confrontational, breathing a sigh of relief. "Look, no offense, but you kind of caught us by surprise. You gotta be the only one we've seen since we got out here." "Yeah, saw you come in last night." "Bet you fucking did," I said to myself. "Been coming up here for 40 years. Beautiful spot, isn't it? Takes a bit to get down into the valley." "Yeah, mate, look, no offense, but we're gonna hit the sack soon. You need a lift back to your camp?" "Nah, all good. Just out for a wander before I tuck in for the night. Saw the fire and thought I'd say g'day. Anyway, better be on my way." And with that, he turned and walked off parallel to the river, into the dark, with no torch. That was officially enough to spook us beyond any ability to calm down. We decided in that moment to pack up in the dark and just head out, even if driving in the dark was a monumentally stupid idea in this part of the high country. We got into the four-wheel drive and drove out, taking us along the valley floor. We didn't see a single campfire, a camp, a vehicle, nothing. We just kept on driving. Halfway home, Jess, bored from the drive, flipped on the camera. Would you know it? No memory card. What the hell? After getting home and telling a few people about what happened, a friend's dad, an avid bushman himself, was the one to officially freak us the hell out. Oh, you met the Button Man. The what now? I said. The Button Man. He's an old bushman who goes out into the high country for months at a time, hunts with a spear, appears out of nowhere, scares people, and has buttons made out of bone. There's a heap of people gone missing up that way. Cops keep looking, but can't find a single trace. Campers, hikers. One camp was found burnt to the ground, a car left abandoned. Can't find any evidence whatsoever. A quick Google confirmed it all. The missing people, the Button Man, the lack of evidence. Police set out into the bush and found his camp, spoke with him, but have really nothing else to go on. The following link has some further info on missing people and the mysterious Button Man. He's very real. Dozens have met him as he appears out of nowhere at their camp. But as far for any connection to the missing people, only he knows. We don't camp in that valley anymore. Hell, we don't camp on the side of the high country anymore. And anyways, that's our story of how we met the Button Man. In the early 2000s in Perth, it was simpler times. At least, that's how I remember them. It was a time where the days seemed longer, the sun seemed a little brighter. Life was uncomplicated by the constant hum of the internet or the blaring of smartphones. Back then, my whole world revolved around a local park. A sprawling green space, just a short walk from our house. Every evening like clockwork, my parents would gather up a few snacks, a blanket, and some of my favorite toys, and we'd head over there. It was our little routine, and I look forward to it every single day. The park was always packed, a bustling hub where everybody from the neighborhood would congregate. Kids raced around, their laughter echoing through the air, while the parents relaxed in the shade of the giant gum trees, chatting and keeping a watchful eye on their offspring. I remember the smell of freshly cut grass, the distant hum of cicadas, and just the way the setting sun bathed everybody in this warm golden light. It was idyllic, perfect even, and I never thought those evenings would end. But then one summer, everything changed. I was 9 years old at the time, still young enough to believe that the world was a safe place, that monsters only existed in the stories that my friends and I made up. But that summer, I learned that monsters can be real, and they don't always look the way that you expect them to. It took place one ordinary evening. The park was buzzing with the usual activity, kids running wild while the adults talked in their little groups. I was with my friends, debating whether to play tag or start a game of cricket. And that's when I heard it. A sound that was both unfamiliar and oddly enticing. It was the jingle of an ice cream truck. I froze, the sound cutting through the unusual noise of the park. Ice cream trucks weren't very common in our neighborhood. In fact, I don't ever remember seeing one before that day. But there it was, rolling into the parking lot at the edge of the park, its sides painted with bright, cheerful colors. The jingle it played was catchy, almost hypnotic. And within moments, every single kid in that park was turning their head, eyes wide with anticipation. I didn't waste any time. I ran over to my parents, practically bouncing with excitement, begging them for a few dollars. My dad smiled, reached into his pocket, and handed me a couple of coins. "Go on then," he said, "but be quick. We don't want to be late getting home." I nodded eagerly and sprinted towards the truck, joining the growing line of kids. The ice cream man was a tall, thin fellow with his friendly smile and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He was handing out cones and popsicles with the efficiency of somebody who had been doing this for years and years. When it was finally my turn, I asked for a chocolate cone. He handed it to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Didn't think much of it at the time. I was way too focused on that ice cream. That first encounter with the ice cream man was uneventful. Just another part of a perfect summer evening. But as those days went on, the truck kept coming, and things started to feel off. At first, it was just a nagging feeling, a sense that something just wasn't quite right. The ice cream man was always there, right around sunset, his truck pulling into the same spot at the edge of the park. He'd serve up ice cream with that same tight smile, his eyes flickering over the crowd of kids, almost like he was searching for something or someone. But what did I know? I was just a kid, more interested in playing with my friends than paying attention to some stranger in a truck. The parents, though, they noticed, my dad especially. I started to catch him watching the truck from a distance, his expression thoughtful, even concerned. He'd never really been the overprotective type, but suddenly he was paying close attention to everything that happened in the park. I specifically remember one evening, as we were walking home, he asked me if I noticed anything strange about the ice cream man. "No, not really," I replied, puzzled. "Why?" He didn't answer right away, just stared off into the distance, his brow furrowed. "Just be careful, okay? If something doesn't feel right, you come immediately and tell me." "Okay," I said, a little uneasy. My dad really was not one to worry about things like this, and seeing him so tense made my stomach twist. It wasn't just my dad either. I started noticing the other parents whispering to one another, their voices low and their faces serious. They were always glancing over at the ice cream truck, their expressions darkening whenever they saw that man inside. I didn't know what was going on, but the tension in the air was palpable, like a storm cloud hanging over the park. Then, one afternoon, I came home from school to find my dad sitting in the living room with a few other dads from the neighborhood. They were huddled around the coffee table, talking in hushed tones, all of their faces grim. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether I should interrupt. My mom appeared out of nowhere and quickly ushered me to my room. "Hey, go play for a bit," she said, her voice tight. "The grown-ups need to talk." I didn't argue, but just walked down the hallway and heard snippets of their conversation. "Something online, it's on the neighborhood forum. Midnight, what kind of sick joke is this? We gotta find out for sure, we can't take any chances." My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, piecing together what little I could hear from the fragmented conversation. They were talking about the ice cream man, the same one who'd been coming to the park every evening. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. That night, the tension inside our house was thick enough to cut with a knife. My dad was on edge, pacing in the living room, checking his watch every few minutes. My mom was no better, her eyes darting to the clock on the wall, her fingers drumming nervously on the arm of the couch. I could feel the unease radiating off of them. It made me anxious, even though I didn't fully understand what was going on. After dinner, my dad finally broke the silence. "I'm gonna go out for a bit," he said, trying to sound casual, but the strain in his voice was unmistakable. My mom shot him a worried look. "Are you sure that's a good idea? What if—" "I'll be fine," cut her off, a little too quickly. "I just need to check on something at the park. I'll be back soon." I wanted to ask what he was gonna do, but the look on his face immediately stopped me. It was a look I'd never seen before, a mix of determination and fear that made my stomach churn. He kissed my mom on the cheek and told me to be good. Then he was out the door, leaving the house feeling colder and emptier than it had just a moment before. spent the next hour or so just on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about what my dad and the other fathers were planning, what they were gonna do or find at the park. Every sound, every creak of the house made me jump, my nerves stretched taut as a bowstring. Finally, unable to sit any longer, I crept over to the window and peeked outside. The street was dark and quiet, the only light source coming from the street lamps casting these long, eerie shadows across the pavement. My dad's car was gone, but I could see a couple of other cars parked near the entrance to the park, all of their headlights off, as if their drivers were trying to not be noticed. Time almost seemed to drag on forever. My mom was pacing now, her worry obvious in every step that she took. I didn't dare ask her what was going on. I didn't think, I just wanted to know. It must have been close to midnight when I finally heard the sound of a car pulling back into our driveway. My mom and I both froze. She was rushing to the door, flinging it open just as my dad walked in. He looked pale, shaken. There was a dark smear on his arm that I realized with a jolt was blood. "Jesus, what happened?" my mom gasped, reaching out for him. "I'm fine," he said quickly, brushing her off. "It's not my blood, it's Mr. Harris. He got knocked down, but he's okay." "What do you mean knocked down?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. "What happened?" When my dad glanced at me, for a moment I saw something in his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. Fear. Real, raw fear. He sighed and then motioned for me to sit down. We went to the park," he began, his voice steady but low, like he was trying to keep control. "There was a post online, something on the neighborhood forum. Someone said there'd be free ice cream at the park tonight, at midnight." I frowned. "But why would anybody go to the park at midnight?" "Exactly," my dad said, his jaw tightening. "We almost thought it might be a prank, but we couldn't be sure, so we decided to go, to see if it was the same ice cream man who's been coming to the park all week long." He paused, glancing at my mom, who was watching him with these wide, fearful eyes. We hid in the shadows near the trees and just waited. Sure enough, right at midnight, the truck pulled into the parking lot, but it didn't play any jingle, didn't turn on the lights, just sat there like it was waiting. My dad's voice dropped lower, and I had to lean forward to hear him. We split up, surrounded the truck from all sides, and then we moved in. When he saw us coming, he tried to drive off. We shouted at him to stop, but he just hit the gas, barreling right into Mr. Harris. We barely got out of the way ourselves. He took off down the road. No lights, nothing. Disappeared into the city. I stared at my dad, my heart pounding in my chest. "Did you call the police?" "Yeah," he replied, rubbing a hand over his face. "We're looking into it, but he's gone. I don't think he's ever coming back." The next few days were a blur. The story of the ice cream truck spread quickly through the neighborhood like wildfire. Everyone whispering about what had taken place, about that strange man who had tried to lure kids into the park in dead of night. The police came round asking questions, but there really wasn't much anybody could tell them. The ice cream man had vanished, leaving nothing behind but this lingering sense of unease. Unfortunately, the park just wasn't the same after that. Families still came, but the atmosphere had changed. The laughter seemed quieter, the games less exuberant. All the parents were just always watching, their eyes scanning the edge of the park, as if expecting the ice cream truck to appear out of the shadows. I stopped going to the park as much too. It just didn't feel right anymore, like a part of my childhood had been tainted by that ice cream man and his dark, twisted game. Even now, many years later, I can't think about that summer without a shiver running down my spine. It was the summer I learned that monsters in the stories are real, and sometimes they come disguised as the most innocent things. To this day, I still can't hear the jingle of an ice cream truck without feeling a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I've lived in Queensland my entire life. It's a place where the land is as ancient as time itself, where secrets are buried deep beneath the red earth, and where you learn early on to respect the land's mysteries. Australia is a continent of many wonders, sure, but it's also a place that holds its fair share of dangers. The outback is unforgiving. The bush can swallow you whole, and the roads, well, the roads have their own stories. One road in particular has a reputation that makes even the bravest of men think twice before driving it at night. Flinders Highway, otherwise known as the Highway of Death. It's a stretch of asphalt that cuts through the heart of Queensland, from Townsville to Mount Isa. It's long, it's desolate, and it's seen more than its fair share of bloodshed. They say over a dozen people might have vanished or been found murdered along that road, and not a single suspect has ever been caught. It's a place where people disappear, where cars are found abandoned, and where the only witnesses are the kangaroos that bound through the bush. I've heard stories all my life. People around here tell them like they're cautionary tales, warning all the kids to keep in line. Don't wander too far from home, or you'll end up just like that hitchhiker who disappeared on Flinders. Don't talk to strangers on the highway, or you'll end up like those poor backpackers. Of course, the Min lights, the Button Man, stories like that. And I believe them, in the way that you believe fairy tales. Sure, they're scary, but they're not real, right? That's what I thought anyway, until the night that I drove down Flinders Highway alone. It was a job that took me out there. A family friend had hired me to do some work at their place, a couple of towns over. Simple stuff, fixing up some things around the house, nothing too complicated. The kind of work that pays cash underneath the table, no questions asked. I'd planned to be done in a day, but as these things go, it took a lot longer than expected. By the time I was finished, the sun was setting, and I was more than ready to get home. Home was only an hour away, and though it wasn't late, I didn't see the point in staying another night. I packed up my things and said my goodbyes and hit the road. The night was dark, with only the silver lining of the moon hanging in the sky, casting just enough light to see the outline of the trees that lined the road. The highway stretched out in front of me, a black ribbon cutting through the bush. I'd driven this road 100 times before, but tonight there was something different about it, something that just felt off. I wasn't really scared, at least not at first. I've never been the superstitious type, and like I said, I didn't put much stock in any of these stories. But as I drove, a feeling of unease started to settle in my gut. It was that kind of creeping dread that just starts out small, like a whisper in the back of your mind, but grows and grows, louder with every passing mile. Honestly, the only other time I've ever felt something like this was when I was a kid, making the drive into town with my parents one evening. On the way in, I remembered seeing an ice cream truck pulled over on the side of the road. When we passed it again later that night, it had been totally destroyed. Popped tires, smashed windows, bullet holes in the metal, the whole 9 yards. What had been a pristine vehicle just 2 hours before now looked like it had been in the desert forever. It was unbelievable in my childlike mind. Anyway, around 20 minutes into my drive now, I saw it, a car on the side of the road. Its hood popped open and the driver's door hanging wide. Even from a distance, I could tell it was abandoned. The lights were dim, flickering like they were about to go out. I slowed down as I approached, squinting into the darkness, trying to make out any details. There was nothing, no sign of anybody around, just the car sitting there, like it had been forgotten. Then I saw it wasn't actually running. There were no lights on within it. What I was seeing was the dim glow of a flashlight on the floorboards. I found this even stranger. Who would walk off into the night and leave their torch behind? I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it yet. I pulled over, idling next to the car, my headlights illuminating the scene. It was an old sedan, beat up and rusty, the kind of car that's seen better days. I briefly thought about getting out, taking a closer look, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the darkness, or maybe it was the silence. Too quiet, even for a place as remote as this. My skin prickled with the feeling that I wasn't alone, that there were eyes on me, watching from somewhere out in the shadows. I decided against getting out. It did not seem safe. And besides, what could I really do? I'm not a mechanic. The car was obviously a lost cause. I'd just make a call to the police when I got home, report the abandoned vehicle, and let them handle it. That was really the only logical thing to do. There wasn't any reason to gamble out here or be a hero, do something stupid and reckless. I knew the history of the highway and didn't want to take any chances. I was about to pull away when something else caught my eye, a flash of movement in the rearview mirror. I glanced up for a split second and I thought I saw a figure standing in the road behind me. A woman, maybe. But when I looked again, there was nothing, no one. Just the empty highway stretching out into the night. I shook it off, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. The mind plays funny games and tricks on you when you're out here alone, especially on a road like this. I put the car back in drive and pressed on, eager to put some distance between myself and that weird abandoned vehicle. But the road had other plans. Another 10 kilometers down the highway, I saw her. She was walking along the side of the road, her steps slow and unsteady, like she was drunk or injured. As I got closer, I could see her more clearly, bruised, battered. Her clothes were torn and stained with what looked like blood. She was shivering, even though the night was warm, and her hair hung in these matted clumps around her face. It reminded me of the Dixon hitchhiker, the ghost of a woman that's said to be haunting this highway at night. It wasn't, of course, as this woman was haunting in a very, very different way. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. She didn't look like she belonged out here, not in the middle of the night, not in her condition. My first thought was she must have been in the car that I'd seen earlier. Maybe she'd gotten into some kind of accident, was wandering around in a daze. I beat my horn, trying to get her attention, but instead of turning toward me, she whirled around and bolted into the bush, disappearing into the darkness. "Hey!" I shouted. She was already gone, swallowed up by the night. I couldn't believe what I just saw. Who in their right mind would charge into the desert in the middle of the night? It was almost certain death, animals aside. This truly is middle of nowhere. I just sat there for a moment, staring after her, my mind racing. The hell is she running from and why? She was clearly in trouble, but instead of accepting help, she fled like a wild animal. Something definitely wasn't right. The only thing that I knew for sure was that I needed to get home, report this to the police. That woman was in danger, whether she knew it or not, and if I didn't do something, she might not survive the night. The more I thought about it, the more that I was sure she had hit her head and was having some kind of episode. The hood to her car was popped open, so that told me something was wrong with the car. I shifted back into drive and floored it, the tires kicking up dust as I sped down the highway. My heart was pounding in my chest, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I don't know what I just saw, but I know it wasn't good. The faster I got away from it, the better. That's when I saw it. The reflection of dim metal in the distance, sitting off the shoulder of the road. At first, I thought it was a police car. Maybe, and hopefully, somebody had already called it in, that abandoned vehicle, or maybe even the woman, and they were out there looking for her. But as I got closer, I realized it was not a cop car. It was a small SUV, parked off to the side of the road, its lights off, barely even visible in the darkness. What little relief I'd felt immediately dissolved into more anxiety. I slowed down as I passed, my eyes scanning the vehicle for any signs of life. There was somebody inside, I was sure of it. I could see the silhouette of a figure sitting in the driver's seat, motionless, watching me as I drove by. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I had to fight the urge to slam on the gas and just get the hell out of there. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. None of this added up. Were they a couple? Had they gotten into a fight? I drove another mile, my mind still racing. Why was that car just parked out there in the middle of the night? Why had that woman run away from me? And why did I now feel like I was being followed? It occurred to me that the car could be unrelated. Maybe it really was just a lover's quarrel. The husband was letting the wife blow off some steam on the side of the roadway. Wouldn't be the strangest thing, I guess, but still it didn't quite add up. Then it hit me. The woman had been afraid of something, afraid of cars, afraid of people. Maybe she'd been running from somebody. Maybe that somebody was sitting in that SUV, waiting for her to come out of hiding. He was parked oddly, predatory even, ready to shoot off right into the shoulder and intercept somebody. He was only a few hundred meters from where I saw that woman. My stomach churned with that realization, and I knew I couldn't just drive away, leave her out there all alone. I had to do something, even if it meant putting myself in danger. I couldn't just leave her to whatever fate awaited her on that godforsaken highway. I pulled off the road and flipped a U-turn, heart pounding as I headed back the way I came. The SUV was still there, parked in that same spot, its driver's side window rolled down just a crack. I pulled up alongside it, my own window down, and called out to the driver. Everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man turned to look at me, his face shadowed in this dim light. He was middle-aged with graying hair and a weary expression. He smiled, but it wasn't a genuine smile. It felt off, too wide, too forced. "Just waiting," he said, voice smooth and casual, like we were old friends just catching up. Waiting for what?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. The man's smile faltered for just a moment, but recovered it quickly. "Just waiting," he repeated, his tone flat. "Did you see a woman down the road?" I asked, watching his reaction carefully. He hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What woman?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I lied. "No one, I guess. I just thought I saw somebody. She was walking the other way anyway." The man's eyes flicked down toward the road ahead. I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was bothered by what I had just said. Even if he didn't show it, his energy definitely shifted. "Sure you don't need any help?" I asked again, my voice strained with the effort of keeping up this whole facade. The man shook his head, his smile returning, but it never reached his eyes. No, I'm fine. Thank you, though." I nodded, rolled up my window, with my heart pounding as I pulled back onto the highway. But I didn't go far, just a little ways down the road. I killed the headlights and pulled off again, hiding my car behind some bramble. I watched as the SUV's headlights flicked on. The car sped off in the other direction that I'd just come from. My suspicion was confirmed. The man was definitely looking for the woman, and he was desperate to find her. Desperate enough to lie. Desperate enough to act like nothing was wrong when clearly everything was. I waited until he was out of sight before I flipped around again, headed back to where I'd seen that woman last. My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, and none of them were good. Didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I could not leave her out there alone. Not with that man hunting her. I pulled up to the spot where she disappeared into the bush, headlights cutting through the darkness. I got out of my car and called out into the night, my voice echoing in that silence. "Hello? Hey, it's okay, I'm just here to help you." There was no answer, just the wind rustling through the trees. I tried again, louder this time, but the only response I got was the distant cry of a bird. I called for 10 minutes, never heard a peep. Then faintly, I heard it, a voice, weak and trembling, coming from somewhere deep in the bush. "Help!" I whipped my head towards the sound and squinting into the darkness. "Where are you?" I cried out. But there was no reply. I flashed my headlights, trying to see if she'd come out, but still, nothing. Fear creeped up my spine, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my flashlight. I kept it inside my glove box. The next thing that I heard was a scream, a blood-curdling, gut-wrenching scream that echoed through the night. It was her. I knew it was, and she was in pain. All I could imagine was that weird fella getting his hands on her. I ran into the dark, stumbling over rock and root, calling out, "Where are you? I'm here, please, just tell me where you are!" Nothing. Just the sound of my own labored breathing and the chirp of the night. And then, silence. Complete, utter silence. I was shaking, drenched in sweat, heart pounding in my chest. I knew I couldn't stay out here any longer. Whatever was happening, I was powerless to stop it. Defeated, I stumbled back to my car, climbed inside, and slammed the door shut. I gunned it, my tires squealing as I peeled off the other side of the road and just sped home, the taste of fear still bitter in my mouth. The moment I was inside, I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, my hands still trembling so badly that I could barely even press the buttons. I gave them my full statement, every detail that I could remember, voice shaking as I recounted the night's events. They took down everything and assured me they'd send somebody out there to investigate, and that was that. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her terrified eyes, her bloodied clothes. I heard her screams echoing in my head over and over again. The next morning, the phone rang. It was the police, asking me to come down to the station. They wanted to ask me a few more questions, and they wanted to go over my statement again. When I got there, they told me about what they'd found. A woman's car had been discovered along Flinders Highway, just a few kilometers from where I'd seen her. The car was empty, her clothes scattered along the roadside. Signs of a struggle, blood, footprints, and remnants of a violent encounter. But no body. They never found her, just like the others, another victim of the highway of death. Another name added to the list of those who vanished without a trace. I spent weeks and weeks talking to those investigators, going over every single detail, trying to help in any way possible. But in the end, it was all for nothing. The case went cold, just like so many others before it, and I was left with nothing but the haunting memories of that night. I still occasionally drive down Flinders Highway from time to time, but never at night. Every time I do, I just can't help but think about her, running through the desert, desperate to escape something she could never outrun. Australia is a land of many mysteries, and some aren't meant to be solved.